Joining us now from the Netherlands is Dr. Felix Ndahinda, who is an analyst and researcher focusing on transitional injustice. And from Kigali in Rwanda, we are also joined by Honoré Gatera, who is director at the Kigali Genocide Memorial, and journalist Vincent Gasana. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I'd like to start, obviously, with Vincent, if I could. The OAU has been accused of failing to prevent the genocide. What is it that they could have done to prevent this bloodshed? Yes, I can hear you. Sound a little bit faint. If you don't mind speaking up, please.
All right, I'll do that. Is that any better?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Good. You said that the OAU or the UN, did you say?
I have Felix and Vincent. Can you both hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, would you mind repeating your question?
So the OAU has been accused of not having done enough to prevent the genocide that occurred 28 years ago. What could the OAU have done?
Well, I suppose one of the things they could have done is they could have paid attention, and being at the time the organization that represented African states, they could have made representations to the United Nations, the Security Council, and made sure that the UN Security Council paid more attention and that the UN Security Council had a force that would have meant anything within Rwanda. So there is a great deal that they could have done. In other words, they were really absent in all of this, and there was no point there being the organization, the African organization at the time, and one of the worst possible crimes in any generation, in any part of the world, happening on their watch, and they had nothing to say. So in that sense, that's what they could have done, and that's what they should have done.
Dr. Felix, what led to the demise of so many Hutus almost 3 decades ago?
I mean, a lot has been written, of course, about the topic, about the psychology of mass violence. And, I mean, there is a long history, of course, about that. I mean, unlike some literature wants to portray it, the genocide against the Tutsi didn't happen overnight. It was not a spontaneous outburst of anger because of the killing of the beloved president, as some literature tends to portray it. There was a long history of racialization of identities in Rwanda from colonial time, the identities that were very much fixed, and the antagonization of those identities, both during colonization and the time that followed the immediate process of acquiring independence in the Rwandan context. And all of that basically shaped the dynamics that ended up, of course, creating the conditions for the mass participation in the genocide, as rightly a good Rwandan scholar, Kimonyo, did analyze it in his book, A Popular Genocide. So in a sense, people were manipulated enough to across time through narratives and propaganda that portrayed the Tutsi as enemies, inhuman, to the level that it made the Tutsi legitimate target when time came to commit the genocide.
Now, Vincent, coming back to you, have all those responsible for the genocide been brought to book? Because I'd like to imagine that part of certainly the healing process for those that were victims is the bringing to book of those that are the perpetrators.
Well, absolutely not. I mean, you've talked about, I caught the tail end of your conversation with Karim Kanimba. And underneath all of that, the subtext to all of this case is really the fact that the justice for an awful lot of people that were involved, were the planners, were the perpetrators, is yet to happen. And so, in a way, reconciliation goes on in Rwanda, and in a lot of ways, Rwanda is moving ahead, in a way, forging ahead with reconciliation, trying to provide the justice it can, and trying to essentially unite the communities. But in a lot of ways, the rest of the world could help more. I mean, we've got an awful lot of people who are serious suspects hanging about in London, in Paris, in Brussels, in Americas, and some of them are even in positions where they're teaching young people in the United States, for instance. So, and of course, an awful lot of them in Africa as well. So the world could do much, much better in trying to bring these people to justice. And so the answer to your question is no.
Dr. Felix, something that baffles me, or puzzles me rather, is how have the people of Rwanda, the Hutus, managed to embrace those that were persecuting them, those that killed them by the hundreds of thousands during that period? Because there is peace and stability in Rwanda, so I can only imagine that a huge amount of work must have gone in to arriving at this juncture. What was that process like?
I think you got it the other way around.
Exactly. I caught that. I think you said how the Hutus come to embrace people who are killing them.
I do beg your pardon, yes.
Yeah. But I get the premise of the question, yeah. I mean, I guess much of it really has to do with the framework that was created or has been created after the genocide. I mean, I understand a lot of descriptions are made to portray the post-genocide politics in Rwanda, and most of the literature tends to always be, especially Western literature, tends to be quite critical. But keep in mind that the way the genocide ended with a military victory of the RPF. And so the RPF had the leeway basically to set the agenda. But from the outset, it decided to rule by associating other parties that did not participate in the genocide. It was not technically obliged to do that. It was obliged, of course, by the Arusha Accords, but they tried to put already a framework which associated other parties, including Tutsis and Hutus, to the governments in the post-genocide era, with, of course, the dominance of the RPF as the party that had won the war. Now, through that, the framework already was set in the Arusha Accord in terms of what society the participants wanted: a united society, a less ethnic-centric society, and trying as much as possible to move away from the past, that long past I described in my first answer. So that being said, my understanding always of the politics after that period has been to try as much as possible to create a society based on that image. And by the way, based already on ideology that the RPF carried through the 4-year period of the civil war. There is a literature also that has analyzed that. For example, I have a colleague who analyzed the liberation songs of the RPF and tried to see the message, which was all about really unity, moving away from ethnicity, and being Rwandans rather than Hutu, Tutsi, and Twats. So it was against the background of that at least the framework was set to try at least as much as possible in a society that was that much broken to mend society and try to take a step moving forward together. So that being said, a lot of sacrifice, of course, was put on genocide survivors by the government. And when I mean the government, of course, it was the government of Rwandans, some from exile, some survivors, but also some who are Hutus who didn't participate in the killings. So a lot of sacrifice were asked from survivors a little bit to be patient and to embrace that path towards reconciliation rather than revenge. And of course, Gacaca came in really as a mechanism that tried to look both ways, both to look at restoration, but also to have some element of punitivity in it. And
if you just allow me to bring Vincent into the conversation, if you are running short. Running short of time.
Let me just add on to that.
Vincent, before you respond to that, I'd like to ask another 2 questions for you to answer. And the first is, France has been fingered as being participatory in all of what happened. Talk to us about the role that they played, and obviously what's important is that this is a period of commemoration of the next 100 days. Just walk us through some of those activities that are happening over the next 100 days.
Okay, let me very quickly add on to what Dr. Ndahinda was saying. He's given us a good analysis to your question. But I just want to add on one slight addition to that. And that is that we need to look at very much even at the pillars of the formation of the RPF, which was, the problem was never about the people of Rwanda. The problem was always about the individuals that hijacked Rwanda and instituted what was a colonially inspired ideology, the Hutu power ideology. So essentially what the RPF has been doing, you hear an awful lot of people suggesting that the RPF is saying, well, there are no Hutu, there are no Tutsi, the RPF is enforcing reconciliation, the RPF is doing this or other the other. Actually, all that the RPF has done and always did is to remind Rwandans of what Rwandans already know, that they are a one people, a united people, a homogeneous people. So in that sense, by giving by giving justice where possible, in Gacaca courts, for instance, as Dr. Ndahinda has mentioned, and but also mostly trying the perpetrators, the planners, and then saying to the rest of the population, well, look, we were taken to a route where we never belonged. Let's try and go to where we are, where we were, where we're supposed to be before all of this foreign external institutional ideology came. And that, in a way, is what has been the main pillar of reconciliation, which is this is a harmonious society and we are one people, but it's not something that the RPF is bringing that is new to the population. The RPF just simply reminds the people who they are. And
Vincent, I'm afraid we've run short of time. I'm going to have to thank you both, gentlemen. Appreciate your time this evening. Joining us from Netherlands, Dr. Felix Ndahinda, who is an analyst and researcher focusing on transitional justice, and journalist Vincent Gasana speaking to us this evening. Thank you so much for your time.